So I'm still sitting here thinking about how we got to this point with the whole Capitol invasion and Trump and everything going on, and of course now it's been almost 2 weeks, and they've started arresting some of the Capitol, whatever you want to call them. How did we get here? I've really thought hard about this and for quite some time. But, it's not just a knee-jerk reaction. I really wanted to dig into not just these recent events or even the last year, but the last 5 years. And I went someplace that I don't like what I came up with. It's hard. It's hard to ignore it, though, and I want to put this out there because it's not good. It's more of an indictment against all of us than anything, and so this is. In the last video, I talked about emotional manipulation, and I said a couple of things that really got me thinking. And that's this: we know that President Trump is a malignant narcissist. Like that's pretty common knowledge, and we even knew this before he won the election. He's a public figure; we've seen it for a long time. He's a businessman, and so his "my way or the highway" method might work well in business, but it doesn't really work well in politics, because politics is the precise opposite of "my way or the highway." At least it should be, but it's not right now. But the "my way or the highway" businessman got elected because politics were that way before he was elected. See, and I think all the way back to 2010 and when Obamacare was pushed, and the way that it was pushed, how it was pushed strictly along party lines. It was all partisan votes. We got rammed all through Congress, and that was for me at least. That's how this decade started, and that's how this decade has ended, right? So this has been a whole decade defined by hyper-partisanship and voting along party lines. They've been doing that for 10 years. And I think that's how we ended up with someone like President Trump as the favored candidate in 2016. But that's not really what's shocking. Okay, so let's mute Trump for a minute and let's think about some of the other things that we've established in recent years. More recently, just within the last 4 years, we've introduced this concept of taking a mental health day from work. I remember the first time I ever heard that a few years ago, where somebody called in, and they didn't call in sick, they called in for a mental health day, right? And there was this kind of sort of this little flurry of cynical reactions like, ha ha ha, mental health day, what kind of snowflake shit is that, and all that other stuff. But it's kind of sort of just, picked up a little bit, and we are far more conscious about mental health than we were 4 years ago. And that's huge, that's big, that's great. But we're not where we should be on mental health, because anyone who struggles with a disorder or a mental illness can tell you that we still stigmatize the disorders that make us cringe, like the gross ones, right? Like hoarding, for example, is one. We tend to still shame certain disorders more so than others. And if you're on this channel, you're probably not a fan of narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, because we've all been on the butt end of it, right? And I am in no way excusing or justifying or glorifying anything about that. This is just an observation that we demonize and stigmatize and shun certain disorders while we coddle and reassure and support different disorders. And there's a good reason for that, because every disorder is different. Some disorders cause destruction and misery and all sorts of negative stuff in their wake, while other disorders are just kind of, cute and cuddly and you want to pet them on the head. Like, I'm ADHD, so I tend to space out, right? People tend to think that's kind of cute or funny or lazy when I'll just be in the middle of talking and all of a sudden just it hangs. You can see this happen from time to time on some of my videos, basically every single one of them. But some disorders are okay in our eyes. Like depression has a lot of support behind it, for example. Thoughts of suicide gets a lot of support. Schizophrenia gets tons of support because they have hospitals, that specialize in schizophrenia management. But then there's, and I think schizophrenia, I'm not sure if that's a disorder or an illness, but it still falls under the broad category of mental health, right? Mental illness, Alzheimer's, dementia, there's a huge support structure and network for that. But what is there for people who have narcissism and borderline? So in cluster B, everything in the cluster B spectrum of disorders borderline disorder is the foundation of that. And then narcissism arises as a coping mechanism. And so does histrionic and antisocial personality disorder. So they're all formed in the same fires, right? So growing up, if you're in an environment that is conducive to developing borderline personality traits, sometimes you're able to overcome those or to come up with a maladaptive coping mechanism. So a maladaptive coping mechanism of narcissism, where you just push and push and push for self-development and building yourself up and achievement and all of these materialistic things. Histrionic personality disorder is if I'm the center of attention and everybody's attention is on me, well then people's attention is not on all this bad stuff over there, so you monopolize the attention. And then there's antisocial disorder, which is basically screw everybody and just, if none of it matters, well then screw everybody else, so that's them in a nutshell. But borderline disorder it at least has some, it's manageable with DBT and CBT. So if you're self-aware if you have a self-aware borderline and they're an adult, they can easily be aware of the fact that they have a personality disorder and that they should manage it with DBT and CBT. And it is possible to be a borderline and to lead a pretty healthy, normal life, so long as you manage it with these techniques. But narcissistic personality disorder doesn't have any kind of treatment or cure or therapy, and it's even really hard to treat them anyways because narcissism, they don't think anything's wrong, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm casting NPD in a different light than we're used to, because we're used to seeing these narcissists, malignant narcissists, as monsters, and they're abusive, and they're full of themselves and they want to destroy you and all these things. And that is all true. I am not shoving that out of the way. But now take the outsider perspective as if you have not lived it, okay? Or lived on the butt side of it. So you have somebody like President Trump, who is a narcissist. He has a disorder. There is no cure for it. There is no management for it. He is the way he is. You can't do anything about it. And the media and everybody identified early on that he's a narcissist, right? So the media, knowing this and knowing that there's no cure for narcissism, there's no way to help a narcissist or change a narcissist or anything like that, while simultaneously we're supposed to be so conscious of mental health and mental wellness and mental illness and be so supportive of people with personality disorders and bad mental health and depression and all of these other emotional and mental issues. You see where I'm going. Once you know who you're dealing with, and this was hard for me to lens. I have had so many narcissists in my life, and I want nothing to do with any of them. It took me a long time to clear, to do some house cleaning in my life and to clear out all of the toxic people. I don't want anything to do with them. And yet media is kind of forced to engage with one and deal with one, and they all know exactly how he is. And this is where my stomach turns a little bit, because now I've got to view this as a different angle. The media knows exactly what they are doing, triggering a narcissist on purpose, triggering narcissistic rage on purpose, and creating the stories for their own benefit. Because we've known even since before he was president that he's a narcissist. And if we know that he's a narcissist, there's no shortage of psychologists and, Google, Wikipedia, YouTube, narcissistectomy. We know what we are dealing with. And there are ways of dealing with it. It's almost like the media has been taking advantage of the situation. And I'm not going to say taking advantage of Trump, so don't even construe it that way. But they're taking advantage of the fact that we have a president with a disorderly personality, that they know how to take advantage of that to trigger these fits of narcissistic rage, to trigger his bad behavior, to get him to run off to Twitter, and then they turn around and they write about it. Never once has there been any kind of narrative around, he's got narcissistic personality disorder, he's a splitter, he has narcissistic rage, and he's the president of the United States. We need to figure out how to help him do his job and keep him in a mentally and emotionally stable and steady state of mind so that he can run the country while he's president. There has been nothing along those lines. And I'll be the first to admit, I've been the same as everybody else. I'm content to sit from the sidelines and watch him and be like, yeah, wow, what a narc, Yeah, he's a narcissist. Well, that's how they are, blah, blah, blah. And it's real easy. It's real easy to look at somebody with a disorder like that and think they're a bad person. But think about this from the flip side of the coin, because we all know what it's like to be abused and to having people purposefully trigger you and purposefully mess with you emotionally and to purposefully target you and try to destroy you, right? That is everything that narcissists do to those who they abuse. And that's what has happened, in a way, is the flip side of the coin for Trump. If you have the media that know these things, that they know he's narcissistic, they know he has a personality disorder, it's well documented, I've been doing this channel for years, talking to people and helping them deal with narcissists, right? There was never anything like that. Why? The internet is full of videos talking about how to cope and manage and deal with narcissists and narcissism. That's fine. We can use that for everybody except the president of the United States. That's not good. That's an indictment against not just the media, but us, because we were also sort of complicit in that. There hasn't really been, there was never a conversation or discussion or anything around it. And you'll hear anybody that, when it's not hyper partisan speak, when people are just discussing Trump. Piers Morgan is a good friend of Trump, and you would never put Piers Morgan and Trump together as friends, but they are. And Piers talks about their friendship quite a bit, and it's illuminating. I'm not going to get into that, but you should look it up. Piers Morgan talking about Trump. Piers Morgan, politically far away from Trump, but they have a friendship that's based on respecting each other's differences, and he talks about that. And yes, it is entirely possible to be friends with a narcissist. If there's no supply there, they're not super interested. If there is supply there, they're very, very interested. But even without supply, you can't, if you know what you're dealing with. Narcissists are kind of like Bruce the shark from Finding Nemo, right? They have all of this potential to be this ruthless killing machine without feelings. But when they get the smell of blood, but absent the smell of blood in the water, then they're big happy Bruce the shark. Sometimes, right? But this isn't. I'm thinking of all of this because narcissists are who they are. You cannot change them. You cannot help them. But what is this saying for us? And it's more of an indictment against us, an indictment against myself, and an indictment against the media and everybody for failing to acknowledge the fact that we're not behaving well. We're not acting the way that we should be acting. We're not attempting to understand, compromise, and work around the situation. We spent 4 years doing nothing but triggering our own narcissistic president. What good did that do? What good did it do? Nothing. It didn't do any good. I can't think of any good that the media really brought to the table. People either love or hate Trump. Well, that's the nature of a narcissist. They're splitters. They are divisive. It's one reason why he's the most divisive president in the history of the country. Or polarizing, I should say. Divisive, whatever word you want to call it. But there was never a national discourse along the lines of, now that we're so super woke about mental health issues, let's address the president's mental health issues and talk about what we can do to adjust and adapt to make these 4 years pleasant, tolerable, and minimize any kind of fallout or damage as much as possible. There was never a conversation around that or damage control or any of that. And it's just shit, I cannot imagine having to be the president for 4 years and every single day being subjected to being intentionally triggered by the mobs and the masses, just non-stop, just for the sake of selling ads. And of course, he had to write it off as they're all fake news, fake media. He's not entirely wrong about that. Sometimes he gets it right. Sometimes he gets it wrong. It's not like 4 years was entirely fake, but he's getting at something there. And the situation's over. Thank God for that. It's the presidency of the United States has not been good for anybody's mental health for the last 4 years, but we never tried to make it that way either. And that doesn't reflect on Trump, that reflects on us. And we never stopped to acknowledge that because we were too busy pointing the finger and judging as somebody who is so easy to judge and so easy to point the finger at. We never stopped to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, why are we doing this? I don't think we should continue on that path because Now Biden is set to be inaugurated in the next few days, and they're already planning on impeaching him before he ever takes office. They just announced they're going to impeach him, and they're impeaching Trump a second time. What's that going to do? We already know that the worst case scenario, if they impeach him, they can bar him from being elected president for a second term. Whoop-de-doo. What's the point of impeaching Biden? Nothing. So we need to stop and just ask ourselves what in the hell it is we're doing now. Anyways, thank you for listening. Please like, comment, or share. I want to hear y'all's opinions on this. I know this is probably not the most popular opinion for a Narcissism channel, but whatever. I don't monetize, and I really enjoy having these talks and discussions with all of you. So thanks again. I'll see you on the next video.